Greetings once again, my friends, and welcome back to Drak Vlogs. And today, we're not necessarily talking about a TV show, anime, or anything like that. Today is more of a response video because last week, my buddy the ShadowBlazer himself, ShadowBlazer 3000 on YouTube, actually did a first con tag video. And one of the people that he tagged for a response was me. And I, of course, was the last person to know. That's usually how it goes. I actually had to find out via the other people that got tagged on Twitter, but sure. So I talked to Alex. I figured out like what exactly needed to be done, and I guess I have to pick targets right after this to see if they will be my target, be my tag. So let's go ahead and get things started. So all of this is based around your first ever convention, and obviously the first question there is, what was your first convention? Now, okay, we can argue semantics left and right on whether or not this actually was a convention. I'm going to call it one because it had the makings of what I knew to be a convention at the time. It just was really small. Like if you compare it to, say, Comic-Con, or I would actually say Anime Bonsai is probably slightly bigger than that, even though that later iterations of it have gotten bigger. My first one, I'm going to go ahead and call it, and you guys can call BS or whatever in the comments if you want. My first ever convention was called Nerdtacular 2012. So for those who have followed me for a while, you guys know that I am actually a lover of podcasts myself. That's why I got into what I love. And in particular, I loved a string of podcasts all from one guy named Scott Johnson. Those who follow podcasts might know him. Like, he's gotten a lot of acclaim at things like BlizzCon and a couple of other major deals for his podcasts, like The Instance. Film Sack, I know, has gotten a lot of praise in podcast awards and things like that. So I followed him ever since, I want to say, 2007. And my first ever podcast with him was The Instance podcast, a World of Warcraft podcast, obviously. But eventually I looked into all of the other stuff that he did, and at that time there wasn't a whole lot. At that time he had Diary of a Cartoonist, which was basically, since he also did podcasts, he also did web cartoon. He was a web cartoonist on the side, or podcasting was on the side. He was doing web cartooning as well as a 9-to-5 job at the time. And so another one that I followed was Diary of a Cartoonist, which was basically like him going through whatever was going on at that given moment. Because at that point his kids were fairly young, and so very relatable. And then also the other one, the big one that I followed from him, was Extra Life Radio. This was actually where he got together with two other webcomic creators, Obsidian and Brian Dunaway. I'll see if I can find their website so you guys can check them out. And he got a big following out of this stuff. So Extra Life Radio, The Instance. He also gained a lot of following from fellow podcasters like Veronica Belmont, Tom Merritt, people that you guys might as well know from like CNET. I think one of them was at Mahalo TV. Yeah, it was Veronica. Veronica also did a bunch of Sony stuff too, so there was plenty of stuff to get there. But I followed their podcast since about 2007, and one event that he'd actually started, I think about a year later, was Nerdtacular. And Nerdtacular was basically where he could get together with his fans and be able to enjoy something. When he originally conceived it, it was just he was going to rent out a movie theater. Whoever could come and watch a movie with him. And I think he started with Spider-Man 3. Well, actually, yeah. So Nerdtacular had been going on for a while after I had started listening, because I think Spider-Man 3 was the first one. So anyway, long story short, eventually Nerdtacular became its own little mini convention. And I was actually very proud to be able to go to one of the first ones where it was like a legit convention. And that was Nerdtacular 2012. Up until that point, he was just renting out movie theaters. And here's the thing. He kept the tradition alive. He still does that as part of it, but now it's kind of like a little mini convention. So yeah, that was my first ever convention to go to, was Nerdtacular 2012. I even have like a bunch of merchandise from that too. I have the old Nerdtacular 2012 t-shirt, which unfortunately is just tattered. It's seen better days. Where was it? It was in, I've got the questions right to the right of me, so bear with me. Where was it? It was in South Jordan, Utah. It was literally like 20 minutes away from me. They had rented out like a little convention, I don't want to say a convention center, but a little center that had a couple of panel rooms, things like that. And so they had like a main conference, and they had the upstairs, which was a bunch of smaller rooms, like a green room for the podcasters. Because at this point, he had actually evolved. So like I said, when I knew him, he had a 9-to-5 job. He was a web cartoonist, and he did podcasting on the side. After a while, he eventually retired, and he actually started Frogpants Studios, which is actually like his new network moniker. Everything that he does is under Frogpants Studios, and that's why Nerdtacular is also under that banner. So not only was he there, but he actually brought out a bunch of podcasters that he knew, or a bunch of media guys that he knew that were doing podcasts under the Frogpants banner, but also doing their own things. For example, Tom Merritt was out there. Brian Ibbett of the podcast Coverville was out there. Got to meet with him. He was pretty awesome. I want to say that the Ladies of Lead, Nicole Spagnolo of the Ladies of Lead podcast, I think that was going on around the time of Nerdtacular 2012. A bunch of podcast celebrities were out there, and he actually was able to bring them out to just a little center where it had a big convention hall for the panels, because there wasn't too many panels. And then there was also like a green room for the podcasters. There was a dealer's room, et cetera, et cetera. So it was just out in South Jordan, Utah, right off the freeway. So it was about 20 minutes away from me. So it was really convenient. That's why I was like, dude, this is 20 minutes away from me. And it would be so advantageous for me if I want to get into radio, if I want to get into podcasts, to go to this thing and learn. And I literally went with a pen and paper, and I went to learn everything I could from podcasters who had been doing it for at least 5+ years at that point. So question 3 is, did I go alone? Yes, I did. I was the only one who was listening to the podcasts. My wife listens to podcasts, but she was very stuck in podcasts like solely devoted to Harry Potter. I want to say stuff that was devoted to Twilight, but I'm not sure on that one. And I tried to get her to listen to some of Scott Johnson's podcasts. She's just never been interested because she's got a huge backlog of everything else she's listening to. So at that point, yes, I did go alone. Again, I went with pen and paper. I went there to learn. Like, my justification for going and for paying the money to go was to learn as much as I could from podcasters, radio guys, media personalities, period. In fact, a lot of the stuff, like, because I was going to school at this point, but a lot of my self-taught stuff actually came from Nerdtacular. I learned a lot of the ins and outs there, especially since at that time I was also contributing to Scott Johnson's podcasts and learning as I was going along. So it was really helpful in that regard. The 4th question is, what was your first impression? Scared out of my wits. I was going there to learn, but at the same time, these are guys that I'd been listening to for a good couple of years. I was listening to their podcasts as I commuted to school, I did have a job at one point, and before I completely devoted myself to school after I got married. So I was listening to these guys on my commute. I really liked them. I related to a lot of the podcasters there. I came across very few that I had disinterest in or hated. I liked all of them, even though I may not have liked, their individual podcasts. So my first impression was I was basically going to go meet, at least in my perception, a bunch of celebrities. And I was scared out of my wits. I have no problem admitting that. I even was a little starstruck there, and it was kind of embarrassing for me, because at the same time I wanted to be calm, cool, and collected, but it was like, oh my gosh, I love you guys so much. And it was hard keeping that in for me. So I was a little starstruck when I went there, and that was a little scary because everybody else there was fans. And I didn't necessarily know what I was walking into, because a lot of these guys had done Nerdtacular before. And so it was like, oh, I'm the new guy here, and on top of that, I'm getting to meet a bunch of people that I never thought I'd ever get to meet, because that was literally my assumption. I literally go off in life just assuming I'm not going to meet any celebrities. That sounds really depressing, but it's like, I literally look at it and go, the odds of this are kind of astronomical. And so the fact that I was actually able to go to a convention where I was able to meet a lot of people that I did look up to at the time and love their work, it was awesome, but at the same time, very, very frightening. Like, I was afraid I was going to make a fool of myself. very much throughout most of that day. Because I was only able to go for not even a full day, like part of a day. A lot of the stuff that I actually wanted to attend, I needed to get back because my dad was having health problems at the time. So what was my first ever panel? That would be the introduction panel to Nerdtacular 2012. I know that doesn't sound awesome, but I actually liked it. I thought it was a cool way to introduce the podcasters that were going to be there, as well as kind of give their thank yous and homage to the communities. I've always, like, when I started up YouTube, I've always wanted to either have a community or support a community very similar to what Scott Johnson has. And what I mean by that is simply that it's always happy, it's always friendly, it's awesome all the time. I've literally seen, like, being on these live podcasts where a troll will walk in there and gets no attention. They literally handle this troll by just not dealing with him at all. Like, eventually the moderators will come in and kick him out, but nobody responds. He literally, like, the troll will literally get ignored. And I've always wanted to have a community like that, where it's not only supportive of the podcasters or the YouTube creator, but also supportive of each other. Like, they got to know each other. And I mean, this community literally named themselves, because when he started up a morning stream podcast, they literally named themselves the Tadpool. So I wanted to have a community like that. And thankfully, it's one of the things I'm very thankful for. The community that I have around my channel is very similar, and I'm happy for that. Let's see. So my first panel was the introduction panel and being able to get to know every podcaster that was able to make it out there. And there was quite a few. I mean, for crying out loud, we had guys coming in from Asia. I can't remember exactly where in Asia. We actually had a podcaster coming in from France who had done a segment like I did for one of Scott Johnson's podcasts on the Instance. And actually, I think at that point, he actually had the job at Blizzard. So he was a Blizzard guy going there, but going as a fan. That's the other thing that I find funny is, like, Scott Johnson's The Instance has been featured on the podcast numerous times. He's had Russell Brower come in, who's like the lead music guy for Blizzard. Chris Metzen has done episodes. In fact, the post-retirement explanation, I believe, was on The Instance, where he actually went on The Instance and explained, like, why he was retiring and things like that. So they actually do have a really good relationship with Blizzard Entertainment. First impressions of the Dealer's Room. The Dealer's Room, I actually liked it. I liked it. Was just, I want to point this out to people. It was small. Like, there wasn't too many people there, and I think all of them were sponsors of people's podcasts there. Most of them Scott Johnson sponsors. So at that point, I liked that it was small. I liked that I actually got to talk to a person who was trying to sell my wares, sell me his wares, which at some conventions I've never been able to do because there are too many people around. And so I actually got to have one-on-ones with a majority of them, including, and it just so happened to be, like, some of these dealers' areas, like for t-shirts and stuff like that, were run by Scott Johnson's wife and kids. So you got to have actually some really cool moments to have a little bit of a conversation with them. I thought that was awesome. And this was very much a little guy's convention and one that I actually wanted to support. I actually did walk away with a lot of merch from that. Like, I wanted t-shirts and eventually I got a DVD of the whole thing that actually, since all of the panels were in one room, they did a DVD for it so you could get them all. Because they actually did exclusive episodes of those podcasts at Nerdtacular. But yeah, I actually liked the Dealer's Room. I got along with a lot of the people who were trying to sell stuff, including actually the Dealer's Room was where I met a lot of the podcasters. That was amazing for me. Let's see. So my first impression of the Dealer's Room, and then what was the best part of the convention? Wow. Okay. Sorry if there's a lot of cuts in this video. I just barely got done with a big mass recording session, and I wanted to add this in there. So, best part of the convention. You guys aren't going to like the answer, but I'm just going to say the convention itself. I had a lot of really great moments that I can't necessarily say are better or worse than the other. One of my favorite moments was, again, this is why it's also kind of an embarrassing memory to me, because I did kind of make a fool of myself and I didn't mean to, but I was starstruck. And it was amazing to be able to go and meet so many awesome podcasters. I got to actually go up and shake the hand of Scott Johnson. And that sounds weird, but to me that meant a lot, because at that point my segments had just barely launched on his podcasts. And I was really worried about whether or not they were going to get cut off because they sucked. And, you know, this was a first time deal. And I got to meet up with him and say, just thank you for putting my segment on the podcast. I really do appreciate it. And got to have a nice conversation with him. Unfortunately, he was busy with other things, but that's when his co-panelist Brian Dunaway, who I love from Extra Life Radio. Like, I love Scott and I love Obsidian, but I always loved Brian Dunaway. He always had some of the better jokes on that podcast as far as I'm concerned. And so he came up, shook my hand, and that's where the starstruck kind of kicked in. I'm like, holy crap, I have just met Scott Johnson and Brian Dunaway in the same place. That's amazing to me, and I think I got a little dumbfounded. Maybe I freaked out Brian a little bit, but I got to make up for it, because later on, they actually did have like a lunchtime and actual vendors there with food, which I guess for some small conventions is not a thing. Again, that's one of the things that made it amazing. And Brian Dunaway was not meeting with people in the green room. He actually went out with his wife to the area where all of us were meeting. And I was talking with a bunch of people coming all the way from like Georgia to see Nerdtacular. And all of a sudden Brian Dunaway asks to sit at the table. And I actually did apologize. I was like, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be starstruck or anything like that. And he's like, dude, that's cool. This is amazing. And we're all having a good time. And I got to have like a really cool 20, 30 minute conversation with him before the next panel started on just gaming, on how he actually got to meet Scott Johnson. And I actually am going to link this over to Brian Dunaway, because I really do appreciate that moment at the podcast, because at that point I was ready to leave. I was ready to walk away, feeling very embarrassed, feeling very much like the creepy stalker guy that goes to cons and thinking I was never going to do this again, which I did one year. I did the next year, but I haven't sadly been able to make it to a Nerdtacular since. The answer for that is they move venues. They're all the way up at Snowbird. They actually reserve a hotel, and again, it's not an easy justification for my wife to say, let's go get a room and go to this convention that you know nothing about and that you're not interested in. So I really do appreciate that from Brian Dunaway. I got to meet Nicole Spagnolo as well. Again, I think she had started Ladies of Leet at that point. And I love the fact that there was a podcast with gamer girls, and they were all like, it was gaming news and it was gaming opinions, but it was an all-girl cast. I appreciated that so much, because at that point it gave me a whole other way to look at things, because where Scott was talking about other things on video game podcasts, like he was talking about more mainstream games, the Ladies of Leet was actually, they were talking about the mainstream games too, but occasionally they'd pull out gems that I actually went out and tried myself and loved. So I got to meet a lot of people. I could not even begin to list them, but I'm so thankful that I got to meet them and got to have a moment to learn from them, like in person, and just apply that more to my own craft, to apply it to my own podcasts. And that was actually the best part, was the whole dang convention, because at that time I was dealing with a lot of issues personally. Like, I was personally frustrated with where I was going, and my dad was dealing with a lot of health issues. And so being able to spend that morning and afternoon there was more than I could ever ask for, which is kind of funny, because I went and watched the convention for the remaining events, and where around the time I actually had to leave was a prize drawing, and they actually called out my name, and I felt so bad about it. I even emailed the guy. I emailed Scott. I'm like, I feel bad. You guys called out my name, and I wasn't even there to claim a prize. He's like, that's cool. Did you at least have a good time? I'm like, yeah, I did. And I really needed that at that time. So I'm going to thank the podcasters, but I'm also going to thank the community over at Nerdtacular, because while that was a scary experience to me, and I'm not usually a guy who steps out of my comfort zone, I really did enjoy my time there, and it kind of cemented me and what I wanted to do. Like, if I wasn't sure if I wanted to do YouTube at that point, that made me feel a little bit more comfortable doing it. I even kind of established a goal, and I still have it to this day. And I don't know if it'll ever happen, but I would very much like one of my podcasts to actually be sponsored within the Frog Pants Network, because that community is so amazing. And I feel bad because I don't get to be a part of it as often. I actually don't listen to his podcast as often anymore. I get to them when I can, but I'm so busy with YouTube and all of the other things that I'm just not as active a listener as I used to be. But I know that I'm kind of running around in circles here, people, but the best part of the convention for me was the convention itself. I got to meet so many awesome people, and very much kind of define my own craft, as well as being able to realize that, you know, these guys were great people, but they were people just like me. You know, kind of have that starstruck moment where they're not celebrities. They are legitimate people. And I got to relate to them, not just on I'm listening to them on a podcast level, but also from a reality kind of level. And I always appreciate them for it. But that's all the questions that I got tagged to go answer. Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to make sure that I had all the questions. And so I guess now I get to pick my victims. So I will tag, and because I know of a few other anime reviewers that have actually done it, I am going to tag the following. I'm going to tag the channel LitaKino, because she's already done this before, but she said that if she gets tagged again, she would do additional stories. And I enjoyed her video personally, so I'm going to tag you again because I want to hear some more con stories from you. I am also going to join LitaKino in tagging Vixion Anime and Manga. We want a video from you. I think you've already made one. Make another one. Dang it. I don't care. I want another one. I'm also going to tag my buddy Anime Atlas to do this video. And also my fellow panelists on the Geek News Reviews and Opinions podcast, Aldo Gomez and Stephen Romney of Board Offline and Romney's Reviews. So you guys can do that. And just for the heck of it, this is not one I'm expecting a response on, but I'm going to send it to them via Twitter anyway. I'm going to tag Scott Johnson and Brian Dunaway of their first con experiences, because I would love to hear that in a video. But that's going to go ahead and do it for me, so I hope I've not been too embarrassing or anything like that for you guys. Thank you guys so much for continuing to contribute to my community so much and to my channel. I really do appreciate it. I don't know if I show it enough, but I do always appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for continuing to like, comment, subscribe to my content, and continue to support me in the ways that you have, because you all are awesome. And of course, I'll see you guys next time for the next review.